That was the moment everything inside me cracked quietly, cleanly, like ice breaking under a single, perfect step. My name's Evelyn Moore, and for nearly 2 decades, I was the backbone of Albright & Co., a mid-sized marketing firm tucked in the heart of downtown Chicago. If the company had a soul, I helped build it. Every campaign that succeeded had my fingerprints somewhere on it, late night edits, weekend strategy decks, endless meetings no one else wanted to lead. And for 19 years, I did it all with one belief: hard work is noticed. That belief shattered on a Tuesday morning. The day started like every other: a stale cup of office coffee, the hum of overworked computers, and the occasional laughter spilling from the break room where the so-called office favorite, Tara Bennett, held court like she owned the place. Tara had been here for 4 years. 4. She was young, vibrant, and shamelessly charming, the kind of person who could convince the vending machine to give her 2 granola bars instead of 1 just by smiling at it. She was also our boss's golden girl. Mr. Jacobs, the regional director, adored her. Everyone did, to be fair. Tara had a talent for making people feel like they mattered, but only as long as it benefited her. She'd breeze into meetings with half-finished slides and somehow walk out with applause. I'd spend nights perfecting the numbers, aligning every graph, only for her to present my data like it was hers. It was an open secret in the office that Tara knew how to play the game, and I didn't. That morning, we were all gathered in the conference room. Mr. Jacobs had called an urgent announcement, which usually meant another round of corporate restructuring or some meaningless pep talk. I took my usual seat near the end of the table, notebook ready, coffee cooling beside me. He cleared his throat, adjusting his tie. As you all know, we've been considering candidates for the new senior account director position. My stomach tightened. This was it. I'd been dropping hints for months, casually mentioning my tenure and my results, like the fact that I'd led 3 record-breaking client renewals last quarter. I even stayed late every night last week to polish my proposal for expanding our Midwest outreach. Everything pointed to me. Then Mr. Jacobs smiled, that politician's smile that never reached his eyes. And after much deliberation, I'm proud to announce that our new senior account director will be. He paused for effect, scanning the room. Tara Bennett. For a moment the room was silent. Then applause, scattered at first, then swelling. Tara's eyes widened, hands fluttering to her chest in feigned shock. Oh my God, really? I don't even know what to say. I sat frozen. My pen slipped from my fingers. 19 years of going the extra mile. Team player awards above and beyond. Performance reviews, all erased in an instant by a smile and a 4-year tenure. Mr. Jacobs turned toward me, his expression soft, patronizing. Evelyn, I know you've been an invaluable part of the company's success. You've built such a solid foundation for Tara to lead from. We're lucky to have your support, my support. He didn't want my leadership, just my support, my reliability, my silence. The rest of the day blurred. Congratulations buzzed around me like static. Tara strutted through the office, thanking everyone with mock humility. At one point, she even stopped by my desk. "Ev," she said, resting a manicured hand on my cubicle wall. "I hope this doesn't make things weird between us. You've always been such a mentor to me." Mentor. That word burned. I smiled, a practiced professional smile, and said, "Of course not. Congratulations." She beamed, satisfied, and walked away. The moment she was gone, my smile dropped like a mask. My fingers clenched around my pen until I heard it snap. By 6:45 p.m., the office was empty. Everyone else had left to celebrate Tara's promotion at a rooftop bar. I sat there, in the glow of my monitor, surrounded by the quiet hum of the machines I'd practically raised. That's when I opened my resignation letter. I'd written it months ago, just in case. I'd never intended to use it. But now the words felt right. I printed it, signed my name with a steadiness that surprised me, and slid it under Mr. Jacobs' office door. As I turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of Tara's new nameplate sitting on his desk. Tara Bennett, Senior Account Director. The plastic still had that fresh, from the factory shine. For a moment, I almost laughed. Let them have their rooftop drinks, their fake praise, their shiny titles. They'd just made the biggest mistake of their lives. Because while they were busy celebrating, I was finally waking up. And I had plans. Plans they would never see coming. I thought the hard part was over the moment I slid that resignation letter under Mr. Jacobs's door, but I didn't realize that walking away wouldn't free me. It would wake something up instead. The next morning, I arrived early, partly out of habit, partly because I wanted to avoid the awkward goodbyes. My resignation email had gone out at dawn. Brief, professional, emotionless. By the time people trickled in, I was already packing the personal things from my desk, the framed photo of my team from 5 years ago, the Employee of the Year plaque from 2013, the little potted plant that had somehow survived every office move. When Tara swept in, she was wearing a new blazer, navy blue, expensive looking. Her hair had that freshly blown out sheen that screamed, "I'm important now." "Oh, Ev," she said in a song tone, pausing at my cubicle. "I just saw your email. You're really leaving." I nodded, keeping my tone neutral. "Yes, it's time." She tilted her head, sympathy painted across her face like cheap makeup. "Well, I completely understand. You've worked so hard for so long. You deserve rest." That last word stung more than I expected. Rest, like I was being put out to pasture. As I handed in my keycard later that day, Mr. Jacobs called me into his office. His expression was carefully composed, professional regret mixed with managerial detachment. "Evelyn," he said, folding his hands, "I just want to thank you again for everything you've done here. You've been the most reliable employee I've ever had." Reliable, I repeated. "Not exceptional." He blinked, caught off guard. "Of course exceptional. But the truth is, the company's heading in a new direction. We need leadership that connects with the younger demographic." There it was, the excuse, the polite translation of "you're too old for the shiny image we want now." I managed a nod. "I understand. Good," he said, relief flickering across his face. "And Evelyn, please don't think this is personal. It's purely business." I smiled, though my chest ached. It always is. But something about the way he avoided my eyes, the way he shuffled a stack of papers that didn't need shuffling, it lingered in my mind. I should have let it go. I should have walked out of that office and never looked back. But that evening, as I passed the glass-walled conference room on my way out, I saw something that stopped me cold. Tara was in there with Mr. Jacobs. The lights were dim, the blinds half drawn. They weren't sitting across from each other like colleagues. They were standing close, too close. I couldn't hear much, just fragments her laugh, his low voice. Then a word caught my ear, transfer. She nodded quickly, smiling, and he reached out, not quite touching her shoulder, but close enough that it made my stomach turn. When she left a few minutes later, she was holding a thick envelope. Our firm didn't do physical bonuses anymore. Everything was electronic, so why the envelope? Over the next few days, as I finished wrapping up my projects, more things began to stand out. Things I'd never noticed before, or maybe never wanted to. Tara's sudden access to files she hadn't needed before. Her credit card being declined at lunch one day, followed by a whispered phone call and a hasty apology. Mr. Jacobs's increasingly long client meetings that no one else was invited to. And then there was the office gossip. Little snippets that floated through the air when people thought I wasn't listening. Heard she got a raise before the promotion. Jacobs says she's taking over Evelyn's client list too. Weird how fast it all happened. Huh. I kept quiet, but inside, unease festered. Something was off, not just favoritism, but something rotten. My final week at the firm was a blur of polite smiles and hearted farewells. Tara threw a farewell breakfast. For me, bagels, coffee, and a speech so sugary it made my teeth ache. I just want to thank Evelyn for everything she's done for this company, she said, her voice trembling with performative sincerity. She's taught me so much about work ethic, professionalism, and grace. I hope I can make her proud. Applause. Cameras hashtags I wanted to scream. Instead, I smiled and said thank you. But when I caught Mr. Jacobs watching from the doorway, his face unreadable, something twisted in my gut. His expression wasn't proud or sentimental. It was calculating. That night, I stayed late one last time. I told security I needed to clear my workstation, technically true. What I didn't mention was that I still had admin access to several project drives. I opened the shared network folder. Most of my files had been reassigned to Tara. No surprise there. But then I noticed a new folder, Client Renewals Q4 Confidential. It wasn't one I'd created. I clicked it open. Inside were invoices, contracts, and payment logs, but the numbers didn't add up. Some accounts were duplicated under different names. Others showed identical figures with slightly different totals. A few had signatures that looked familiar, too familiar. I knew those client files, I'd handled them for years. But the signature wasn't mine. It was copied from a document I'd signed last quarter, and the approval initials on several falsified invoices. TB, Tara Bennett. My pulse thudded in my ears. Was it possible? Could she have been rerouting funds, inflating commissions, or worse, falsifying data to make her performance look better? I printed a few pages, not many, just enough to avoid suspicion, and slipped them into my bag. As I shut down the computer, I told myself I was overreacting. Maybe it was a system error. Maybe she'd just mislabeled files, but deep down I didn't believe that. The next morning, I received an email from HR confirming my resignation had been processed. Attached was my final paycheck summary, a figure that seemed smaller than it should have been. When I called HR, they said some of my unused vacation days had been adjusted due to policy changes that apparently began the same week Tara's promotion went into effect. Coincidence, they said, right? I left the office for the last time that afternoon. As the elevator doors slid shut, I caught one final glimpse of the floor I'd called home for 19 years. Tara stood near my old cubicle, laughing with Mr. Jacobs. She was wearing another new blazer, gold this time. Her hand brushed his arm as they talked, casual but intimate, like it wasn't the first time. And though I couldn't hear their words, I saw something in his face, worry, not joy. He was saying something low, hurried. She shook her head, smiling too widely. Then she slipped him a folded piece of paper. The doors closed, and that's when it hit me, the feeling I couldn't shake. Whatever Tara was doing, Mr. Jacobs was part of it. And if they thought my resignation meant I was gone for good, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. The first week after I left Albright & Co. was the quietest my apartment had been in years. No buzzing phone. No 6 a.m. email pings, no late night strategy calls, just silence. And for a while I tried to convince myself that silence was peace. But peace doesn't ache. Peace doesn't replay conversations in your head at 2 a.m. Guilt does. I kept thinking, maybe I overreacted. Maybe Tara earned it. Maybe I was just bitter. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw that envelope in her hand. That whispered transfer. That flicker of something ugly in Mr. Jacobs's face when he'd said purely business. Something didn't fit. And if there's one thing 19 years of project audits had taught me, it's this. When the numbers don't fit, someone's lying. 3 days after leaving, I got a call from Marcy, one of the junior analysts who used to sit near me. She sounded nervous, whispering like she didn't want to be overheard. "Ev, sorry, I know you've moved on, but did you see the new quarterly report?" "No," I said slowly. "Why, there's a huge discrepancy. The Midwest renewal numbers are off by a lot. but Tara said it's just a delay in client billing. I froze. What kind of discrepancy? Two of your biggest accounts, Bright Source and Midway Logistics. Their invoices got resubmitted twice. My heart stuttered. Those accounts were my crown jewels, both renewed under me, both clean. Can you send me what you're seeing? Marcy hesitated. I can try, but Tara's been locking folders, even the shared drives. I thanked her, but as soon as we hung up, I felt the familiar burn of obsession. The one that had made me stay late every night for 19 years. I couldn't let it go. That evening, I dug out the printed pages I'd quietly taken before leaving the mismatched invoices, the ones with the forged signature. I laid them across my dining table, side by side, like puzzle pieces. At first glance, they looked legitimate. But the more I studied them, the clearer the pattern became. Each duplicated file had a small discrepancy. A different account number, a subtle rounding change in the totals, a slightly adjusted date. Enough to slip past casual review, enough to double bill, and every one of them had been approved under Tara's initials. I leaned back, rubbing my temples. My brain was firing questions faster than I could answer them. Why would she risk something like this? Was she pocketing money? Or was someone else, someone higher up, using her name? I didn't want to believe Mr. Jacobs could be involved. For all his flaws, he'd been my boss for almost 2 decades. He'd trusted me, promoted me twice, even sent flowers when my father passed away. But the look he'd given Tara that night, no. I couldn't ignore that. The next day, I went for coffee near the office, partly out of routine, partly because I wanted to see something for myself. Through the café window, I spotted Tara stepping out of a black sedan in front of the building. Not unusual, except the car wasn't hers. It was his, Mr. Jacobs's. They didn't walk in together. She waited until he parked, then entered 5 minutes later. A show of separation, a performance. My stomach tightened. Then, as she disappeared inside, her phone buzzed on the table of the cafe next door. She'd dropped it earlier. The screen lit up with a single line of text from an unsaved number. Same account as before. Don't worry, he'll approve it. The message disappeared as the phone locked again. I stared at the reflection of my own face in the glass, pale and grim. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I tried, my brain spun tighter around the what-ifs. What if the company's money wasn't just being mismanaged? What if it was being moved? What if Tara was helping? What if I'd been a cover all these years, the reliable one who signed everything without question, who made the paperwork clean? The thought made me nauseous. I tried calling HR the next morning, asking casually about my records, specifically my performance reviews and salary logs. Sorry, the rep said, hesitant. Those files are restricted now. Restricted? Why? New management protocol. Tara's department authorized it. I hung up slowly, heart pounding. Tara wasn't just the new senior director. She was rewriting the company's history. By that afternoon, my apartment felt like a crime scene. Papers scattered everywhere. My laptop open with spreadsheets, my old emails synced through backup files. I scrolled through sent messages from the last few months of my job, looking for anything, any strange instruction, any signature I didn't remember authorizing. And there it was, an email from Jacobs R. to Moore E., dated 2 months before I resigned. Please process attached renewal for Bright Source under Q4 ledger. Temporary routing change for accounting per CFO request. But when I checked the attachment, it was one of the fake invoices. The temporary routing change redirected funds to an account I didn't recognize. A private account in Ohio under the name T. Bennett Holdings. My throat went dry. I double-checked, cross-referenced, verified the timestamps. There was no mistake. Mr. Jacobs had personally sent that directive, and Tara had created the fake company. It wasn't favoritism anymore. It was collusion, and for months, they'd used my name to make it all look legitimate. The fury hit so hard I nearly knocked my chair over. 19 years of loyalty. 19 years of quiet obedience. And this was my reward: used, erased, replaced. I needed proof, real proof, something I could show without being dismissed as a bitter ex-employee. So I called Marcy again. Marcy, I need access to the shared archive, the old renewal logs, the ones from last fiscal year. She hesitated. If Tara finds out, she won't. I cut in. Just a few files. I'll handle the rest. After a pause, she whispered, Okay, I'll send a link tonight. But Evelyn, be careful. They've been asking questions about you. Questions. Yeah, Tara told accounting you might have taken company data when you left. She said you were upset. My blood ran cold. They were already covering their tracks. That night, when the file link came through, I stayed up until dawn crossed, checking every ledger, every transaction. The pattern was undeniable. Small transfers, duplicated payments, hidden under expense tags and client adjustments. Hundreds of thousands of dollars. And they'd started right after Tara joined the firm. The timeline fit too perfectly to be coincidence. But what haunted me most wasn't the numbers, it was the feeling. I wasn't angry anymore, I was scared. Because if they were willing to use my name, forge my signature, and rewrite my records, what else were they capable of? The first time the phone rang that night, I thought it was Marcy again. But the voice on the other end wasn't hers. It was low, calm, unfamiliar. Ms. Moore, the voice said, you shouldn't be looking into this. Then the line went dead. And for the first time in 19 years, I realized something I never thought I'd say. I missed the office. Not because I loved it, but because in there, at least, I'd known who was watching me. The phone call left me frozen, heart pounding, fingers slick against the receiver. You shouldn't be looking into this. 8 words. 8 words that slammed every door of denial shut. For a few minutes, I just sat there on my couch, the city lights flickering through the blinds. I could hear my own breathing, shaky and uneven. I tried calling the number back, but it was blocked. Of course it was, they knew. Mr. Jacobs, Tara. Maybe both. The realization wasn't cinematic, no lightning strike, no dramatic gasp, just quiet understanding, like stepping into cold water. For 19 years, I'd believed that loyalty was armor, that if I kept my head down, did my job, and never complained, the world would treat me fairly. But loyalty wasn't armor, it was a leash, and they'd used it to strangle me. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, the phone rang again in my mind. Every creak in my apartment sounded like footsteps. At 3 a.m., I gave up pretending. I turned on the kitchen light and spread the documents back across the table. The forged invoices, the altered routing numbers, the copied signature that looked almost perfect. Almost, there was a tremor in the loop of the Y, in my last name, something subtle but wrong. That detail mattered. It was proof someone else had written it. And then, something hit me. If they'd gone this far to cover their tracks, they must have left something else behind. A trail. I started combing through my old backups again. The ones synced to my personal cloud before I left the company. Months of emails, file revisions, internal memos. At first, it was tedious. Hundreds of routine messages about deadlines, client updates, office birthdays. But then I noticed something strange. 2 weeks before Tara's promotion, Mr. Jacobs had sent an internal memo titled Q4 Adjustments for Legacy Accounts. It had gone out to everyone except me. I only saw it because someone replied, all by accident, and my address was buried in the chain. The memo instructed department heads to reroute several inactive client accounts under Tara's oversight. Those accounts weren't inactive. They were mine, profitable and current. I stared at the screen, my chest tightening. They hadn't just taken my promotion. They'd taken my work. Every campaign I'd built, every client relationship I'd nurtured, stolen, renamed, repackaged under Tara's shining new title. And no one questioned it because, as far as the company was concerned, I was already gone. That was the breaking point. The moment the fog lifted, I'd spent weeks, years, really believing my value came from how much I gave, how much I endured, how much I forgave, but they had turned that against me, and for the first time in 19 years, I realized something simple and dangerous. I didn't owe them anything. The next morning, I looked at myself in the mirror. The woman staring back looked older, yes, tired, hollow-eyed, but not defeated. Somewhere under all that exhaustion was steel. I'd built an empire of results for that company. I knew their systems, their vendors, their internal language better than anyone. If they thought they could erase me, they'd forgotten who wrote the rules in the first place. It was time to stop mourning and start moving. I started small, quietly. I called Liam, a data analyst I'd trained years ago, who'd since moved to another firm. We hadn't spoken in months, but I remembered he'd always admired how clean my reports were. Liam, I said when he picked up, I need a favor off the record. He hesitated. Depends on what kind of favor. Do you still have access to public corporate filings? A pause, then yeah, why? I need to trace a few company account numbers. Something's wrong with the ledgers at Albright & Co. He didn't ask questions after that. He'd always trusted me. Within an hour, he'd sent a message back. Evelyn, you might want to sit down for this. That Ohio account, it's not personal. It's a shell company registered under a holding firm owned by a man named Richard J. Jacobs. My stomach dropped. Mr. Jacobs, the same man who had smiled through my resignation speech. The man who'd said it's not personal. I reread the message 3 times, trying to make sense of it. He wasn't protecting Tara. She was protecting him. That changed everything. All those secret meetings, the envelopes, the whispered transfers. Tara hadn't been the mastermind. She was the puppet, the pretty face that distracted everyone while Jacobs siphoned money into his own company. And now that she was in charge, she was the perfect scapegoat. My hands trembled as I realized what that meant. When it all came crashing down, and it would, she'd take the fall, and he'd walk away clean. That was his plan all along. He'd groomed her, promoted her, and used my resignation as the perfect cover-up. He hadn't just stolen my promotion. He'd weaponized it. For the first time in weeks, I laughed, a short, sharp sound that surprised even me. They'd underestimated me again. Mr. Jacobs thought I'd fade away quietly. Tara thought I'd sit at home nursing my wounded pride. But I hadn't built my reputation on pride. I'd built it on precision. And if precision was what it took to bring them down, I had plenty left. The next step was clear: gather evidence. Not guesses, not hunches, evidence. I compiled everything I had, emails, contracts, memos, and created a digital archive on a hard drive. Then I printed hard copies of the most damning documents and stored them in a sealed envelope labeled for legal review. I didn't know yet if I'd go to HR, the board, or the press. But I knew one thing: I wouldn't go quietly. Still, something inside me hesitated. Because despite everything, part of me didn't want Tara destroyed. She was complicit, yes, but she was also caught in the same web I'd lived in for 19 years. A world where pleasing the boss meant survival. Maybe she'd started out naive. Maybe she just wanted to be noticed. I understood that better than I cared to admit. But understanding didn't mean forgiving. That night, as I finished organizing the files, I poured myself a glass of wine, the first in months, and sat by the window, watching the city hum below. For years, I'd measured my worth by how much the company needed me. Now, for the first time, I was measuring it by how much power I still had, and how much damage the truth could do. I wasn't just Evelyn Moore, the quiet workhorse anymore. I was the woman who knew where every body was buried. And tomorrow, I was going to start digging. The first time I saw Tara after leaving the company was on a Friday morning, 8 weeks after my resignation. She wasn't wearing her usual perfect smile. She looked pale, sleepless, cornered. It was her who called me. Her voice on the phone was trembling. "Evelyn, please, we need to talk." It's about Mr. Jacobs. We met at a quiet café 3 blocks from the office, the same one where I used to order my 7 a.m. coffee before the world fell apart. She came alone, no makeup, hair tied back, clutching her phone like a lifeline. "Tara," I greeted coolly, stirring my coffee. "You look different." She laughed nervously. "You found something, didn't you?" I said nothing. Her eyes darted around before she leaned in. "Jacobs knows. He knows someone's been looking through the records. He thinks it's me, isn't it?" I asked softly. Her composure cracked. "No, he made me do it. He said it was temporary, that it was for executive restructuring. He said if I didn't help him, he'd tank my career before it even started." Her voice broke then. For the first time, she didn't sound like the golden girl everyone adored. She sounded like someone drowning. "Tara," I said, my tone sharper than I meant, "you signed those invoices. You copied my signature. You let him erase 19 years of my work." Tears welled in her eyes. "I didn't know it would go that far. Please, Evelyn, you're the only one who can stop him." She slid a small USB drive across the table. "What's this? Everything," she whispered. "The shell companies, the wire transfers, the fake audits. I saved copies. I thought if I ever needed proof, well, now I do." I stared at the tiny silver drive, the key to everything, and realized this was it. The line between being the victim and becoming the avenger. The next week was a blur of planning. I worked in silence, methodically, the way I used to prepare campaign proposals, only this time the product was vengeance. I took the USB, matched it with my own files, verified timestamps and routing data, even pulled archived statements from public business records. It was airtight. Jacobs hadn't just stolen money, he'd created an entire network of ghost accounts, using Tara as his front and my name to legitimize it all. Hundreds of thousands of dollars, laundered through fake vendors and consulting fees. And now I had every document to prove it. But I didn't go to HR, not the board, not even the police, no. Jacobs loved publicity. The annual company gala was coming up, hosted at a downtown hotel, attended by investors, clients, and media partners. It was his stage, so that's where I would break him. The night of the gala, I arrived uninvited, in a dark blue dress, the kind I hadn't worn since my promotion party years ago. No one stopped me. Old employees smiled politely, assuming I was there as a guest. Tara was there too, standing stiffly beside Jacobs at the podium. She caught my eye from across the room, just for a second, and gave the faintest nod, the signal. The presentation began. Jacobs took the stage, confident as ever, basking in the applause. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice smooth as glass, "this year, Albright & Co. celebrates unprecedented growth under new leadership." My voice cut through the speakers before he could finish. "Funny," I said, stepping forward. "Growth built on fraud usually looks impressive until the truth comes out." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Cameras turned. Jacobs froze. "Evelyn," he said tightly, "you're not." "Oh, I am." I held up a small remote. The big screen behind him flickered, and suddenly, the company's logo disappeared, replaced by spreadsheets, emails, and transaction logs. My voice played through the speakers, calm and clinical. "Between 2021 and 2024, over $800,000 was transferred from company accounts into shell corporations controlled by Richard Jacobs under the alias T. Bennett Holdings. Funds were laundered using falsified invoices approved by his assistant Tara Bennett and signed under my name without consent. Every eye in the room was on him." Jacobs stammered, stepping forward. "This is absurd. She's a disgruntled former employee." Then maybe the federal auditor in the back of the room would like to confirm. All heads turned as 2 men in suits stood from a corner table. They weren't guests. They were the SEC investigators Liam had contacted for me. The room exploded with whispers. Jacobs's face drained of color. You planned this." I smiled slightly. "I built this company from the ground up. You should have known better than to underestimate my attention to detail. Tara stepped up then, trembling but resolute. She's telling the truth, she said, voice shaking through the microphone. He told me to falsify records. He said Evelyn was leaving anyway, that no one would notice. Cameras flashed. Journalists scribbled furiously. Jacobs turned on her, his calm cracking like thin glass. You stupid girl. But before he could finish, one of the investigators placed a hand on his shoulder. Richard Jacobs, the agent said, you're under investigation for corporate fraud, embezzlement, and falsification of financial documents. The crowd erupted, phones recording, people whispering. Some employees clapped nervously, others just stared, stunned. As security escorted him out, Jacobs's eyes met mine. For the first time in 19 years, he looked small. The fallout was swift and brutal. News of the scandal broke within hours. Corporate giant rocked by embezzlement allegations. Whistleblower exposes director's fraud. My inbox flooded with messages, reporters, ex-colleagues, even board members. Tara's name was cleared in the investigation, though she lost her job. She reached out once weeks later. I'll never forget what you did. She said, you could have ruined me too. I told her the truth. You didn't need my help for that. You were already drowning. I just gave you a way to swim. When the dust settled, Albright & Co. filed for bankruptcy. The board dissolved the Chicago branch entirely. I should have felt empty, but I didn't. I felt alive. For the first time, I wasn't invisible. I wasn't the reliable one sitting quietly in the corner. I was the storm that nobody saw coming. Weeks later, I stood outside the courthouse as Jacobs was led in for his arraignment, cameras flashing, reporters shouting his name. He glanced at me briefly, a shadow of the man who once owned every room he walked into. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. Justice wasn't about satisfaction anymore. It was about balance. And after 19 years, the scales were finally even. That night, I went home, poured a glass of wine, and opened my laptop. A new email draft blinked at me, subject line, consulting proposal. I was starting my own firm. No more bosses, no more favorites, just me, and the work I'd always been proud of. Before I hit send, I whispered to the empty room, 19 years, not wasted, just waiting. And for the first time in my life, I meant it. Revenge doesn't always come like thunder. Sometimes it unfolds like a slow, perfect symphony, each note deliberate, every crescendo earned. For months I'd watched the pieces fall. The company had collapsed. The media storm had scorched Jacobs's reputation. Tara had vanished from social media, but there was still one final act left: the courtroom. The day I stepped into that federal courthouse, the air felt charged, thick with unspoken judgment. Cameras lined the steps outside, reporters shouting over one another. Ms. Moore, is it true you were the whistleblower? Do you regret exposing your former boss? Were you motivated by revenge? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. My silence spoke louder than any headline. Inside, the courtroom smelled faintly of paper and cold ambition. Rows of observers filled the seats, former employees, journalists, even a few old colleagues who once avoided eye contact when I passed their desks. And there, at the defendant's table, sat Richard Jacobs. He looked older now, his once perfect posture bent, his silver hair disheveled, his custom suit replaced by something off the rack. He glanced at me briefly, no words, just recognition. The predator had finally seen the trap. The prosecution began methodically, presenting the financial records. Shell companies, duplicated invoices, and falsified documents, all under Jacobs's approval. Then they showed the routing trail from T. Bennett Holdings directly to a personal account in his name. The jurors leaned forward. Mr. Jacobs, the prosecutor asked, can you explain why company funds were rerouted into an entity you secretly owned? Jacobs's jaw flexed. It was an oversight. My assistant handled your assistant, Tara Bennett. He nodded quickly, seizing the lifeline. She went rogue. I trusted her. She used a mess. Moore's resignation as an opportunity to funny. The prosecutor interrupted, because Ms. Ben, it has already testified under oath that you directed every transfer, and that you told her Ms. Moore would never question anything. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Jacobs's face went white. She's lying. The prosecutor smiled coldly. Then perhaps you can explain this. He gestured toward the large screen. An audio clip began to play. Jacobs' voice, crisp and arrogant, recorded in his office. Sign the damn papers, Tara. Evelyn's gone. No one's going to dig through her old files. The sound hit like a gunshot. Even after months of knowing the truth, hearing his voice, that tone of ownership, that casual dismissal of everything I'd ever done, made my stomach twist. The courtroom erupted. The judge banged his gavel for silence. When the prosecution rested, it was my turn. They called me to the stand. I took a breath, stood, and walked forward, steady, composed. The same way I used to walk into every boardroom for 19 years. Ms. Moore, the prosecutor said, you worked under Mr. Jacobs for how long? 19 years. I replied. And in that time, how would you describe your relationship with him? Professional, I said evenly. He valued my consistency, my silence. A few people chuckled softly. Did you ever expect to be promoted? My throat tightened, but I nodded. Yes, I was promised that position informally, of course. I'd been training new staff, managing client renewals. Then one day, he gave it to someone else. The prosecutor paused. Ms. Bennett, yes, and after your resignation. I discovered my signature had been forged on several financial documents that led directly to this case. Why didn't you come forward immediately? I looked over at Jacobs. He was glaring, eyes like a cornered wolf. Because for 19 years I believed in loyalty. I said quietly, even when it wasn't returned. The room fell silent. Until I realized, I continued, that loyalty without respect is just servitude. The defense tried to paint me as bitter, a scorned employee out for vengeance. They showed my resignation letter, my printed files, even hinted I'd stolen company data. When they asked Ms. Moore, isn't it true that you were upset after being passed over for promotion? I smiled slightly. Of course I was. Anyone would be. But I didn't destroy the company. Mr. Jacobs did that all on his own. The jurors nodded. One of them even smiled faintly. But the real twist, the one that no one saw coming, came on day 3. Jacobs's defense called his wife, Margaret Jacobs, as a character witness. She walked in wearing a cream suit, every inch the picture of poise. She'd been silent through the entire scandal, the loyal spouse, the quiet observer. But when she took the stand, she didn't defend him. She destroyed him, Mrs. Jacobs. The defense began, you've been married to the defendant for 25 years. Would you say he's a man of integrity? She tilted her head, voice calm. He used to be, the defense faltered, used to. She turned to the judge. Your Honor, I have financial records of my own, including property deeds, trust accounts, and a recent offshore transfer to the Cayman Islands, all under my husband's name. Transfers he made without my consent. A murmur swept through the courtroom. The defense lawyer paled. Objection, overruled, said the judge. Mrs. Jacobs glanced toward me, then, just briefly. I realized in that instant she knew everything. Maybe she'd known longer than anyone. And now she decided to end him herself. When the verdict came, the courtroom was so quiet I could hear my heartbeat. On the count of corporate embezzlement, guilty. On the count of wire fraud, guilty. On the count of falsifying financial records, guilty. Each word was a hammer strike. Jacobs didn't move, didn't breathe, just stared forward hollow. His sentence, 15 years in federal prison, restitution of all stolen funds, and the seizure of his personal assets. The company's investors, many of whom had been sitting in that courtroom, immediately announced a civil suit. By the end of the week, everything he owned was gone: his penthouse, his cars, his reputation. Even his wife filed for divorce publicly, decisively. The next morning, the newspapers were merciless. Corporate king falls from his throne. Assistant turned whistleblower topples executive giant. 19 years of silence and injustice. And right below those headlines was a photo. Me walking down the courthouse steps, chin high, the wind catching my hair like something out of a film. For once, I didn't hide from the cameras. I let them see me. Not as the quiet employee who'd been ignored for 19 years, but as the woman who burned an empire to the ground with the truth. That evening, I stood on my balcony, watching the city lights shimmer below. I thought of the years I'd given the missed vacations, the weekends lost to deadlines, the way I used to measure my worth by the approval of a man who saw me as replaceable. Not anymore. This was my story now, my ending, or maybe my beginning. I whispered it to the night like a promise. You gave the promotion to your favorite, Richard, but I gave you your legacy in ashes. And for the first time I felt no anger, only peace. They say revenge doesn't heal you, that it just replaces one kind of pain with another. But when I stood outside that courthouse, the same place where Richard Jacobs's empire officially collapsed, I didn't feel broken or hollow. I felt free. For the first time in 19 years, there were no deadlines, no fake smiles, no weight pressing between my shoulder blades every morning before work. Just sunlight, cool air, and the quiet hum of traffic as the world went on. And for once, it was my world again. The days that followed felt almost unreal. The news cycle devoured Jacobs's downfall, interviews, editorials, podcasts dissecting one of the most calculated corporate betrayals in recent history. His name trended for weeks, not for his success, not for his leadership, but for his fraud. The footage of his arrest played on every channel, the man who once boasted about vision and loyalty, now handcuffed, head down, escorted out of the company he built on lies. And right beside that footage, they played mine, the woman he'd underestimated, the one he thought would fade quietly into retirement. I didn't need to say anything. The world already knew. Tara disappeared for a while after the trial. But one morning I got a short email. No apology, no excuses, just 3 words. You were right. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't friendship. But it was acknowledgement, the kind I'd waited almost 2 decades for. I never replied. Some chapters are better closed without a signature. A few weeks later, I was invited to speak at a business ethics conference. Ironic. Given I used to believe ethics were just PowerPoint bullet points no one read, when I walked onto that stage, the audience of executives and young professionals rose in applause. They didn't know me as the reliable one anymore. They knew me as the woman who refused to stay silent. I told them the truth, not just about Jacobs, but about the quiet kind of betrayal that eats away at people every day. The worst kind of theft, I said, isn't money. It's taking credit for someone's time, their loyalty, their belief that effort still matters. When someone steals that from you, they're not just a bad boss, they're a thief. Years, the room was silent. Every eye locked on me, and then the applause came. Not polite this time, but fierce, like they understood. That night, I walked home under the city lights, the same skyline I used to see from my old office window. Only now it didn't remind me of exhaustion or loss. It reminded me of endurance, because I hadn't just survived 19 years of invisibility, I'd turned it into my armor. And when I finally fought back, I didn't just get revenge. I reclaimed every version of myself that loyalty had silenced. Jacobs's sentencing hearing was held 3 months later. I didn't need to go, but I did. He looked smaller now, thinner, older, his arrogance stripped away like a peeled mask. His wife didn't come. His lawyer barely looked him in the eye. When the judge read his sentence, 15 years, full restitution, a lifetime business ban, he didn't argue. Didn't even blink. For a moment I almost pitied him, almost. Then I remembered every time he'd said, "It's just business." And I realized this was just business too. Only this time, the balance sheet was mine. The board offered me a settlement later. a public acknowledgement of my contribution, along with a generous payout for damages and intellectual property rights. I took it, not out of greed, but because every hour I'd given deserved to be paid in full. With that money, I launched Moore Consulting, a small firm dedicated to workplace accountability and employee advocacy. Ironically, my first client was a company struggling with management trust issues. When their CEO nervously asked, "How can we avoid another Jacobs situation?" I smiled and said, "Start by listening to the people you ignore. My life now isn't glamorous, it's quieter, simpler, and honest. Some mornings I still wake up early out of habit, ready to answer emails that don't exist. Then I make coffee, water the same little plant I rescued from my old cubicle, and remind myself I don't work for anyone anymore. I work because I want to. Sometimes when I pass the old office building, I stop across the street. It's vacant now, the windows dark, the logo gone. The place where my voice once echoed in silence is now just another empty floor in a city full of stories. And that's exactly how it should be. The revenge didn't make me cruel, it made me clear. I used to think power belonged to those who controlled others' promotions, titles, salaries. But real power, it's in walking away, in knowing your worth long after someone else tried to erase it. I've met people who whisper that I was lucky, that the scandal made me famous. But luck had nothing to do with it. Courage did. And courage is what grows in the quiet moments, the nights when no one believes you, when you're shaking, doubting, and still choose to keep digging for the truth. Because justice isn't about destroying the villain, it's about restoring yourself. So here I am, Evelyn Moore, 19 years of silence, 1 act of rebellion, and a lifetime of freedom ahead. And if you're watching this, maybe you've been where I was. Maybe you've worked your heart out while someone else got the glory. Maybe you've been the invisible one. If that's you, listen closely. You are not invisible. You're just gathering proof. And one day, when you decide enough is enough, when you finally walk away, when you finally speak, when you finally take back your story, they'll hear you. Oh, they'll all hear you.